welcome to the George Thomas Clark podcast. It's a Monday morning, and we're hunkered down here in my office, as well as our guest, Tyler Derosier, is in Crookston, Minnesota. We are observing social spacing, and Tyler, when I was talking to you last week, you had some emergency calls because the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, said, hey, we've got to start shutting things down, shutting these businesses down. In that sense, Minnesota was a little late. But in your case, what that gave you is a lot of obligations, a lot of work. Was it pretty hectic the last couple of days last week?
Yeah, since I do a lot of tech support in my local hometown, I was getting a lot of calls from some businesses I support to help them kind of be able to work from home remotely. And so some people needed to get laptops as well, so we had to try to source laptops for them to bring home and also get their computers at home set up with some software that allowed them to connect into their computers in the office. So I had spent probably a good, I want to say 2 to 3 days worth of work just helping some people with that aspect. And I support about 5 businesses in my hometown, so you can about imagine the amount of people that might be who are kind of desperate to get that working from home situation under control.
Now, when you say 5 businesses, would that be more, in some cases, more than one person per business?
Oh, yeah, for sure. For example, I do tech support for a law firm in town, and they have 12 people in the office. So that's 12 people that I support, and that's just one business. So a couple other businesses are insurance companies in town, and they each have about 4 or 5 people in their businesses as well. Another business I support is like a salon and spa, and that's maybe 2 or 3 people. So there's quite a bit of people that rely on me to help them in my hometown.
Now, Tyler, you're welcome, and we encourage you to be absolutely frank about this. I'll tell our audience that I am something less than a high-tech guru. In other words, I need a lot of help. Can you tell me what percentage of your clients in Crookston are worse, as bad as I am, or worse? Is there anyone worse? Or?
Oh, Tom, I would say you're not that bad considering some of the people I deal with. I'd say you have a good understanding of at least how computers work and how to go out and browse websites and that kind of stuff. And, you know, there's some people that I deal with sometimes that have quite a bit of trouble just understanding basic.
They don't even know how to do a Google search and things of that nature?
Well, they do for the most part. The good thing is that people are pretty good quick learners. If I show them something, how to do something properly, and walk them through it visually, they're pretty quick to understand kind of what's going on, and they just need someone to kind of handhold them initially. And once that kind of handholding takes place, they can usually get things down.
Yeah, you know, in that sense, I have found that a computer tech is very much like a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a teacher. There's a lot of psychological kind of aspect to it.
Yep, that's definitely for sure. And I think a lot of people like myself are visual learners too. They don't know how to do something until someone kind of shows them visually how it's done. And I find that to be true a lot of times with computer technology and working with computer software and programs. People are quick to figure it out once they are shown what to do.
Okay. Now, this troubleshooting surge that you had recently was, of course, due to the coronavirus, which I checked the figures last night.
Yep.
Worldwide, 34,000 people have died, 2,500 in the United States. There are 142,000 cases in the United States and about 750,000, 750,000 worldwide. Now, you're in rural Minnesota. That is a small town Minnesota. about
Yep.
100 miles south of the border, roughly 300 miles north of Minneapolis. Have there been reported cases in Crookston of the coronavirus?
Not as of yet. Fingers crossed. I hope there aren't any right now, but you just never know how quickly it can spread, and with the lack of testing in a lot of areas, it's just tough to know what might be going on out there too.
That's certainly true. That's the acceleration of this disease is just unbelievable. Between Friday and Sunday, a 48-hour period, we went from roughly 1,000 or so deaths in the United States to 2,500. It basically doubled in 48 hours. So, and it's doing that in other places. New York is just very packed. My wife is from the Philippines, and I was telling her, she's not from Manila, she's from north of there on the island of Luzon, but it's a very crowded city like New York without remotely the financial resources of New York. So I think, not to be a pessimist, but just to take a realistic look at it, there's going to be a lot of surges in this illness, and things are going to get worse before they get better. But I think being in small town America is a good place to be, because you certainly have good medical care for testing when that becomes necessary. Now, as I mentioned, Tyler lives in Crookston, Minnesota, a town of 8,000, whereas he's still a young man, but as a kid and as a high school athlete, he played hockey. And he told me that he had received several concussions and was concerned that perhaps that would lead someday to dementia pugilistica. I know you're a boxing fan, so I mean, I assume you have no after effects to this point.
Not that I know of, but it's just always concerning knowing what we know now about head trauma and the repercussions of it. Back then, even when I was playing, that was probably like 15 years ago, maybe even more than that now, the head trauma concept wasn't really talked about as much. We didn't really know too much about it that we do nowadays. So I think no one was really worried about it as much, and back then when I did have concussions, it was kind of just like, well, you had one, stay at home and recover for a day or two, and then get right back on the saddle again and start going out there and getting hit again.
Well, that sounds downright humanistic to how they've done it until fairly recently with football. A guy would get a concussion, he would be down for the count. Now remember, by comparison, boxing, which is a very primitive sport, if you're down for the count of 10, hey, you're out, and you're supposedly kicked out of the gym, even training for 90 days. But a football player can be down for 10 seconds, even 1 or 2 minutes, and they'll put him back in. So I assume, at least in your case, you would be removed from the game for the remainder of the game.
Yeah, back then I did not play because my concussion, one of them was I kind of just got my bell rung, and I was just kind of out of it for maybe a few minutes, and then I kind of came to it again. The second time I had a concussion, it was a little bit more severe, and I actually lost my short-term memory for a good hour. The people would tell me things, and then I would forget what they were asking me, and I honestly don't remember any of this. I was in the locker room, I guess, and people were trying to have conversations with me, and I would be communicating with them, but then I wouldn't remember anything I said. And this was very troubling, and they brought me to the hospital, and they diagnosed me with a concussion, and it was actually at the hospital I started to get my short-term memory back, and I was able to start to remember things. And then I did sit out from hockey for a good 2 weeks, I think, after that, because it was more of a severe concussion. But then after those 2 weeks, I was right back at it again, and in full contact hockey and getting checked again. And knowing what we know now, though, I don't think my parents would have allowed me to even play hockey again for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I can understand that. I don't have children, but if I did, they would not be playing hockey or football. Of course, they wouldn't. No boxing and no mixed martial arts. I'd let them wrestle, baseball, basketball, and soccer. I think are, the least
Those are good
dangerous.
sports. And I played tennis as well all throughout high school, and that's a pretty safe sport for the most part. You're not getting
It
injured
is.
too much anyways. You have
Unless
potential for getting hit by a tennis ball or something, but that's
Yeah,
pretty rare.
What is even more rare, fortunately, is if you got close to the net when, say, someone like Serena Williams was finishing an overhander,
Right.
Federer or Nadal, that could be bad.
You'd be in trouble.
Now, a little more about Tyler. He graduated from the University of Minnesota at Crookston, where he lives, and he moved from there into Alaska and worked 3 years for a computer firm. And how did you like Alaska, that enormous state, 2.5 times as large as Texas?
Yeah, it was. It kind of. It was something that I really looked forward to doing. I had the opportunity to go there from one of my professors at the college. His son had moved up to Anchorage, Alaska, and started a technology company with a group of other coworkers. And when I had the opportunity to go up there, I was ecstatic. I was really psyched to just get up there because I love mountains and I love scenery. And so I just jumped on the opportunity right away, and I said, yeah, I'll do that. And I didn't even know what I was getting into right away. I had never really met these people before that worked at this company. I had an interview with them over the phone, and they're like, when can you get here? And I'm like, well, probably as soon as possible. And it happened within months of graduating college and then just moving straight up to Anchorage, Alaska. And I was there for 3.5 years.
Now, did you live in a house or an apartment up there?
I actually moved in with one of my coworkers up there. I knew who the guy was, but it was like, I was just meeting these people pretty much for the first time. And he had a decent sized house up there in Anchorage, Alaska. And I was able to stay in one of the rooms, and that's where I started living anyways. And, thankfully when I moved up there, the guys that I worked with were a great group of guys. They loved the outdoors. They were really nice people, and they kind of showed me the ropes of Alaska. They were big fishermen. We did a lot of fishing up there, hiking, a lot of outdoor activities. Saw quite a few grizzly bear and wildlife and all that fun stuff too.
Well, I know the fishing, at least in certain parts of Alaska, is spectacular. This has been about 25 years, but I was talking to some fellows who lived in Washington State, the Seattle area, and they worked for my stepbrother's company, and they had done a great job. So their reward was to go to Alaska, and not just a tourist spot. They were flown in to the backwoods by a plane. And I said, that's fantastic. I said, what was the fishing like? And they said, every time you threw in the bait and the hook, that you got a strike. And I said, well, that must have been tremendous fun. They said, yeah, it was for a while, but then we started taking bets who could throw it in, who could cast without catching a fish within 5 seconds. In fact, they said one of them, this is back in the older days when they had removable tops from beer, and one of them threw a beer top into the water, into the river, and a fish struck the top of the beer can. So in other words, that's big time fishing. Now you were there more recently. Would you say the fishing is still quite good up there?
Oh yeah, it's hit and miss. You have to kind of know when the fishing is good. For example, the fishing that we would do a lot of times would be salmon fishing. And so basically there were certain areas of Alaska that are known for really great fishing, where you don't have to use a small plane to fly into these remote areas.
Mm-hmm.
The Kenai River, for example, is kind of like a world renowned kind of salmon fishing river, and so you have the salmon coming in from the ocean, and then they go up to the Kenai River, and they have these little paths that they take up the river. And so these are certain times of the year that people just know that fishing is really good, especially in like the summer months of June and July, certain times. And if you know when the fish are coming in and you know where to go, I mean, it's basically a cast, and right away you're getting a fish on the line. So yeah, before I moved up there, I wasn't that big of a fisherman, but when I lived up there, I was with some pretty serious fishermen, and they taught me, pretty much everything I needed to know to get going with that.
Now, what kind of fish did you catch up there?
So for example, like sockeye salmon, silver salmon, king salmon. Then we would even do like trout fishing, rainbow trouts, steelhead. That was pretty much the gist of it for the most part.
Now, I imagine these are rather large fish. How many pounds roughly?
For example, the average pound for like the red sockeye salmon was probably the most common and really good eating fish. You're getting anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds usually, probably more around 10.
That's a big fish.
Yeah. Oh yeah, when you get one of those on the line, even like, especially a silver salmon, which can be up to like 15 pounds, no problem. They are fighters on the line, and they're flopping all over and jumping around, and they're pretty tough to reel in. And if you ever were to get a king salmon on your line, the king salmon can get all the way up to like the 50, 60 pound range. You're getting a gigantic fish.
That's
so,
you. Did you ever get one of those?
Truthfully, I had one on the line a couple times, but I never was successful in reeling one in. You do have to have the proper equipment for being able to pull in such a big fish too. You have to have weighted fishing line that's correctly weighted. You have to have the right type of rod, lures. It seems like the king salmon were always a lot more difficult to catch. It was a more rare fish, and they were only in certain spots, and yeah, they were just a lot more difficult to get all around. One thing, keeping on the fishing topic, once you are a resident of Alaska, which takes a full year of living there to get, you are qualified for dip netting. And dip netting is where you basically have a giant net that you just stick out in the water, and you can scoop the fish out into the net. And it's much easier to catch fish that way when the fish are coming in. For example, like you can go out there and dip net in a hot spot where the fish are coming in and pull in 20 fish in a matter of hours, maybe even an hour. And probably less than an hour.
That is
probably less than that sometimes.
Well, that sounds like the kind of fishing I was telling you about that those guys had done 30 years ago. Just reeling in constantly.
Yeah.
And is there a limit to how many fish you can catch up there?
Yeah, I think the head of the household, can get maybe 30. 30
per day.
Fish
or?
No, I think like. Oh, how does it work again? I think you can get that amount in a day, but I think like you can only have like that amount in your freezer then for a while, and then for each additional member of your family, you can be getting quite a bit more fish as well. So there are limits to how much you can keep in your freezer stocked at home.
I see. Now, I've been wanting to ask you, no conversation of Alaska is complete without my wanting to know if you ever met or saw Sarah Palin up there.
I got kind of a funny story for you. Never did get to meet her personally, although she was around quite a bit when I lived up there. When my parents came up to visit me, they they wanted to just check out all the tourist areas and check out some surrounding towns. And they wanted to know where Sarah Palin lived. And I believe she and Palmer, yeah, that's what it is. Sorry, I had to think for a minute because it was Wasilla. That's what it was.
Wasilla.
Wasilla. And so with my parents, we drove up to Wasilla, and we drove to where we could actually see where her house was. And so we did a little drive-by, so I actually saw her house where she lives, but I never did see her in person.
I see. From what I've seen photos of her home. She has a nice place.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
I understand that she and her husband, Todd Palin, Todd has filed for divorce last September.
I did hear about that, yep.
Yeah, he's filed, and hopefully they're undergoing counseling. Maybe they can get it together. Now, we're going to talk in just a second about the coldness in Minnesota. Is Alaska as cold or colder than Minnesota?
You know, it's really depends. For example, Anchorage is a little bit more temperate because it's closer to the water. It's right in Cook Inlet area where there's a lot of surrounding water, and south of that is the ocean again. So Anchorage gets cold at times. I want to say the average winter temperature was maybe 15 to 20 degrees a lot of times, and sometimes it would hit 30 degrees, which was quite warm considering where I'm from in Crookston, Minnesota, in the winters. In January, February, a lot of times the temperature is around 0 degrees, and it can hit 20 below no problem. So,
right. I think you mentioned there was one night earlier. This is in a private conversation rather than this one. I think you mentioned that it had hit 30 degrees below zero one night.
Yeah, that's correct. 30 degrees below zero actual temperature without the wind chill. Now, when the wind chill comes in, when it's 30 below, we can see negative 50 to 60 below with the wind chill. And when that happens, you don't want to be outside for more than a minute or two. It's bad.
That's pretty scary. I've been in 0 degree weather a long time ago in Ohio during the winter. It was 0 degrees. But I've never been in that kind of weather. And as a naive Californian, I asked you in one conversation, I said, well, you have a dog. Does your dog sleep inside? And you said...
Yes, without a doubt. The dog would not make it if it stayed outside.
Now, what do the dogs do when they have to heed nature's call? I mean, do you let them out for like a minute or something while they take care of that?
Oh, yeah. The dogs have a pretty good coat of fur on them, so they're made to tolerate fairly cold temperatures. And, when it's 20 below, the dog can be outside for at least a few minutes, no problem. I mean, they can be out probably for like 10, 20 minutes. 10, 20 minutes, there's potential to get frostbite on their paws, but, they can tolerate the cold pretty good.
I'm guessing there aren't too many short-haired Chihuahuas in Crookston.
Probably not too many, but for some people, they love those small dogs, and I know there's a few of them anyways.
All right. Now, when you mentioned what sounds like a good experience on and off the job in Alaska, and you made the decision to come back to Crookston and start your own business, which is a very difficult thing to do in terms of security. People, have someone else paying the bills, making decisions.
Yeah.
What compelled you to go into business? Obviously, a desire for independence, but let's have you tell us about that.
So my reason for leaving Alaska was because it was my intention to go up there in the first place just to get some experience and, check out the state of Alaska and everything it offered, scenery-wise and outdoors activities and stuff like that. It was never my intention to be up there long-term, even from the very beginning. So after about 3 years, I just thought, and after paying so much money to travel back to Minnesota just to see family and friends, I thought it's just time to move back. So I kind of just, without a true plan on what I was going to do next, I just decided to move back to Minnesota and my hometown again, and I thought, well, I'll just figure it out as I go after that. And it wasn't my intention right away to kind of start up my own kind of business and freelance work. It just sort of happened because people started contacting me asking, hey, can you help with this computer related issue or that? And I had more and more people coming to me, and all of a sudden I just thought, well, maybe I might as well just start up my own little business and get involved in the local community with tech support work. And after I started doing tech support and some web design work, I got connected with a book publishing company as well, and started to do a lot of book design, whether it was kind of formatting the text of the book or even some of the design work of the covers and that kind of stuff too. So I do a whole mixture of things, and they're all mainly technology related, technology and design related. But yeah, I kind of my skills encompass a lot of different things.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, as you know, you've done about 10 of my books so far, interior design, and about 4 book covers. And Tyler is very talented at both interior design, graphic artists, art, covers, and things of that nature. So that's another aspect of your work that is growing. One other question I had: do you like small town living? I guess you do. Tell us, there are some advantages.
I think it's what I've always known. It's what I grew up with, and so I haven't really, when I moved up to Alaska for a little bit, it's not like Anchorage was a gigantic city like Los Angeles or New York City or something like that. It was small enough where it didn't feel too large anyways. So I've never really known what true big city living is like, to be honest. And I kind of prefer small town because there's a lack of traffic. Seems like there's less stress. Everyone kind of knows everyone, which sometimes can be a bad thing, depending on things. But
depending on what stage of your life you're in.
Right.
As a younger man, I wouldn't have wanted that, but. Now,
it could be a little troubling when you're younger if you get into some get mischievous in some certain ways. Yep. But overall, I do like small town living, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. I think we can tell our listeners that this is our first George Thomas Clark podcast, and I'd like to thank Tyler not only for taking part in this maiden interview, but also for helping me out, as he's helped so many others, with the graphical and technical aspect of this setup, which I assure you is rather complex. So, Tyler, as far as you can tell, do we have things pretty well set up technologically?
I hope so. I think we do. It's definitely a learning experience, and I think we can only get better from here on out.
Right. And our next task, when we sign off here, we're going to upload to Google and Apple and Spotify and some of the others. That's our next step. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Tyler Derosier.
Yep. Glad to be here.
All right.
Thanks,
Talk
Tom.
to you later.